Several weeks ago we began a sermon series entitled Changing the World. And we began by talking about the power of your influence to change this world. And then last week we honed in a little bit closer and we talked about how we can change the world when we love the world. And today I want to give you what I think is the climax of our message today. And that is that I want to talk to you about how you can change this world by sharing God with the world. Friends, we're living in some very difficult days. You don't have to sift through the newspaper too far or watch the news too long to see anger, frustration, judgment, criticism, fear, anxiety plaguing the world right now. Let's recap the news over the last couple of weeks. A Russian airliner shot down out of the sky. 300 people lose their life. Last week, a terrorist attack in Paris took the lives of 130 people with countless others injured. Every day in Syria and Iraq and in the Middle East, they are experiencing their own Paris, with many people dying every single day. Some people are dying simply for their faith. Then we read in the news that we are at an all-time high rate of divorces in our country. We're reading how addictions are plaguing our nation. We are reading about how a young man can walk into a church and take the lives of innocent people in church. We are living in some very difficult days right now. And if we're not careful, we can allow all that anger, the fear, the anxiety, the judgment that we hear on the outside to impact what God's mission is for you on the inside. If you're not careful, you can jump on that bandwagon of fear. You can jump on the bandwagon of being scared. You can jump on the bandwagon of lack of hope. If you're not careful, you too can jump on that bandwagon. But I want you to understand this important principle today. You're in this world, and no doubt about it. And there's going to be a lot of unhappy things that are going to happen in our life. But you're not of this world. God calls you to be different. You're not the same as everyone else who's riding on that bandwagon. You're called not to ride the bandwagon. Listen up. You're called to drive the bandwagon. What is that bandwagon? It's the bandwagon that Jesus Christ is in control. That when we see sadness going on in the world, I'm not going to be quiet and just kind of ride the bandwagon. I know I'm supposed to stand up and talk about what Jesus Christ means to me. I know that I can't just ride the bandwagon that tells me I need to judge people, be critical of people, or be silent when God's telling you stand up and to believe that I'm in control. God doesn't need you to ride the bandwagon. He's asking you and me, you're not the same, you're different. Drive the bandwagon. You see, God's hands in this world that are used to write letters of encouragement to people, that are used to hug people and tell them, I know you're having problems in your marriage. Don't worry, God's going to get you through it. God's hands in this world that are supposed to go around people and say, I know you're fearful right now, but don't worry, God's in control. Those hands are your hands. There are no other hands but your hands. There's no plan B for God. You are only the plan A. God's voice to talk about what Jesus Christ and His church means to you is your voice. God's voice to tell people God is in control. Fear may try to overtake this world, but Jesus Christ is greater than this world. He's already conquered this world. That voice, God's voice, listen up, is your voice. And finally, God's feet in this world that are there to run to help people in need, not to run away, not to overlook people. God's feet in this world are your feet. You see, God didn't make you the same. He made you different. And listen, if you want to be different, you got to be willing to make a difference into this world. I want you to write in your worship guide, because it's not mentioned in there, the book of Ephesians, chapter 3. This is your worship guide. If you haven't received one when you came in, there should be one on your pew, but in there it has all of our notes. Just want you to write down Ephesians chapter 3, because whenever Jesus Christ talks about the church, he always says and compares it to his own body. He says, you the faithful, you're my arms. He says, you the faithful are my feet. That's what he says in Ephesians chapter 3. You are my eyes. He always compares the church to his physical body. And you know what he says in Ephesians 3 through the inspired word of St. Paul? He says, you want to know what the mission of our church is? You want to know what your job is as Christians are, as part of my body? Is to share me with the world. To hug people. To witness my faith to the world. To encourage people. God's mission for this church is to share him with this world. Let's kind of dig a little bit deeper in the book of, we're going to switch to 1 Peter chapter 5. It's on page 319. Just so you all know, we do this every single time. We don't want to just give you the content of a book in the Bible. We want to give you the context. St. Peter is the brother of St. Andrew. Two brothers. Andrew is the first called. Andrew is the first patriarch, the founder of the church in Constantinople. Peter, we know, is the first bishop of Rome, generally believed to be that. And so Peter, as the bishop of Rome, is addressing the Christians in Asia Minor at this time. And he's telling the people there a very important lesson. 1st and 2nd Peter, some believe, are just really one letter. But listen to what he says. Chapter 5, verses 1. He says, I, who am an elder myself, appeal to you, the church elders. Now, some of us might think when we see church elders can think of just the papadis, the priest. But the Bible calls you part of the royal priesthood. You too were ordained. When you had an Orthodox baptism, one of the reasons why you walk around the trapeza, the table, is not for just some nice spiritual thing, but you're walking around because you are saying that as a Christian, I'm going to be different. And the way I'm going to be different is I'm going to be someone who is going to be a leader in my faith. I'm not going to ride the bandwagon. I'm going to drive the bandwagon. And so he says to all of us, I am a witness of Christ's suffering, and I will share in the glory that will be revealed. And that I'm begging you, I appeal to you to be shepherds of the flock that God gave you. Could you imagine? You are a shepherd. God has put people in your life. We talked about this several weeks ago when we began this sermon series, that there are almost 12 people that you can find in your circle of influence. You are the elder in that circle. God is looking and depending on you to guide them. Yes, they're your family, your children, your parents. They're all part of that, but also people that are outside, people that you're connecting with on a day-to-day basis. Then later on it says this, verses 4, it says, and when the chief shepherd, Jesus Christ, appears. Listen to what the promise that God gives us when we do this, when we shepherd our flock. And when the chief shepherd appears, you will receive the glorious Stephana, crowns of glory. One of the reasons why in our wedding services, we put the crowns, the Stephana, on your heads. Is yes, you're king and queen of your family, but you're also biblically stating you are going to get a crown of glory that will never be stained when and if you desire to be an elder and to be a leader in the church. And you will receive the glorious crown which will never, ever, ever lose its brightness. Powerful. St. Peter used his God-given hands to write an encouraging word to the people of the world that is still intact today. Imagine what God is depending on me and you to do. So how do we do this? Well, look at your worship guide, and I've given you just a few steps to do this, but a couple of things that I want you to do is, number one, don't go through life correcting people, but connect people to God. So often in our journey of faith, we like to try to go and correct people. Sometimes we can judge people. I'm right, you're wrong. You're not doing this right. Let me tell you something. What God desires for you to do is not to be the judge. He wants you to simply connect them to Him. I like to think of it like a courtroom. In a courtroom, there are several key figures there in the courtroom. There's a judge. You and I, we're not called to be judges. There's the prosecutor. You're not called to prosecute people. You're not a defender either. You know what your job is and my job is as Christians? Is to be the witness. I need to witness my faith. I don't need to go around judging. I need to just witness. Saint Isaac the Syrian, a saint that experienced an enormous amount of persecution, in many ways what he was living through was much worse than what was now. He said this powerful statement. He says, "Be crucified, not crucifying." In other words, you and I, whether we want to own it or not, we have our own crosses to carry. None of us, hate to break this to you right now, none of us are perfect. Some of us have addictions that we're dealing with. Some of us, it's cosmopolio, it's gossip. Some of us were always negative. We can never see the brightness in life. Some of it's impatience. But whatever it is, it's your cross. And St. Isaac is saying, carry your cross. Don't go crucifying other people. It's a powerful lesson. Second, be the example. St. Paul says that we are the ambassadors of Christ. What are we called to do? To be the ambassador. We are God's personal representatives on this earth. We are to show people through our words and actions what we believe in our church and what we believe as Christians. And many Christians today, we don't realize that many people in this world today leave Christianity not because of the theology. They leave it because sometimes the people that are practicing that theology have a disconnect. There's a mismatch, a miscommunication between what they're reading and hearing and what they're doing. Several years ago, many of you know I teach a class of world religions at a college here in Jacksonville, and I was teaching a class, and there was this young girl that was in my class and always sat in the very back of the classroom, was very active and involved always. And anyway, at the very end of the class, my students don't know what I do for a living. In fact, if they're watching now, they just figured out what I'm doing for a living, but they have no idea what I'm doing. And so I just kind of walk into class, and they know me as Professor Lowe or Dr. Lowe. And so at the last day of class, I kind of call it on my syllabus the shock and awe day. And that's when I come in wearing what you always see me wearing, and that's my collar with my black shirt. And so I said to everyone, I'm a priest. And everyone was like, no way, you? I mean, a priest? How is that happening? And then there was this young girl that I'm talking about. She sat in the very last seat in the corner, and she just started to cry. And I thought, Lord, what did I just do? I just simply stated that I'm just a priest, you know? And so she said, after class, she says, can I talk to you, Professor Lowe? I said, sure. She goes, I used to be a student at the University of Florida. And when I was a student there 4 years prior, I did something that I shouldn't have done. I went to an event and did a lot of drinking and inappropriate stuff. But I was assaulted. And when I was assaulted, for weeks and weeks, I left my church. I felt so dirty, I could not even come into church. And she said, then eventually, I mustered up the courage to come to church. And I said to the pastor there, I said, Pastor, can I just meet with you for a few moments? And he said, sure. And so he met with her, and she said, instead of him comforting me during this very difficult time in my life, he blamed me for being at the wrong place at the wrong time. That was 4 years ago, and I have not stepped back in a church since. And she said to me, I've enjoyed this class, and I've really wanted to connect with you, but I have a problem now. You see, sometimes, friends, we may not need an outside power to hurt us or to kill us. Sometimes we do a pretty good job ourselves. Sometimes we can undermine the message of hope, peace, and encouragement. That young lady, though, by God's grace, ended up finishing my class, got an A in the class, and then went back to the University of Florida. And I told her, I connected with her this past week. She's actually watching our services right now. And I just want to tell her that we love you, and that if you're in the Jacksonville area, we'd love for you to come and worship with us. But God cares about you. And that's the message that we should always be sharing. We need to be the example. And finally, I want you to go and bring back the lost sheep of God. God loves to see all of us in church and the countless others, the hundreds of others that are watching us right now. He loves to see you engaged. But nothing makes the heart of Jesus Christ and His church happier than when you go bring back someone that you haven't seen in church in a while. Someone who may not be connected to Christ. Someone who may just not feel a connection with Him. Maybe some of those people may have, for whatever reason, had something negatively spoken over them. We don't know. But our job, and what Jesus says, is that I get so happy when I know that you're going after, because my voice is your voice, my arms are your arms. Bring back the prodigals and bring them to me. And finally, have them encounter me. You know, it's amazing the story of how Russia became Orthodox. There was a prince named Vladimir. Vladimir was a pagan. He didn't ascribe to any belief system at all. But something in his heart one day in the 900s tingled in his spirit. And he sent out 10 missionaries to go and to research all of the main religions of the world. They traveled to different areas of the Middle East, in Europe. And then they finally ended up at their last place, at the church that we all call the Mother Church of Hagia Sophia in Constantinople. When these missionaries walked in, they were not Christians. They didn't ascribe to Christianity. When they walked through the narthex, the Pangadi, and walked into the church itself, the missionaries wrote back a beautiful letter. You should read it. That's actually online. They write a letter back to Prince Vladimir, who doesn't worship Christ, who doesn't accept Him, doesn't believe Him. They say, if only your family, if only your mother Olga could have experienced what we're experiencing right now. He said, we don't know if we are in heaven or if we're on earth because of the beauty of the choir, the amazing priest. The people are so kind and so loving. They wrote back that letter. Vladimir, living in Kiev, was so moved by that on that day he became baptized. Simply those people, those missionaries, using God's gift to write, using His hands to write a letter, they became Orthodox. And one of the largest Christian countries in this world today is Russia. Why? Because of an experience they had in the church. Don't be afraid to invite people to come worship with us. You just try your best. God will do the rest. I leave you with this. Some of you might be thinking that this sermon series has been great. You've really found some meat to it. You've been encouraged by it. And some of you might be feeling like, how do I make this relevant in my life? How do I take this message and make it relevant in my life? And some of you might think that you're not even worthy to do any of this. But I want you to think of this one story. In 2012, Russian scientists were digging in a river called the Kolyma River. It's in northeastern Siberia. They were digging some 130 feet below the sea level, below the bed of this river. When they were down there, they started to excavate this ice, because in this northeastern part of Siberia, only 2 months out of the year is the water thawed. It's always frozen. 10 months out of the year, it's frozen. So as they were bringing this up, this excavating of this ice, they saw in this clear ice container a little dot. So they cut open this little ice. And then they looked inside, and it was a seed. They dated this seed to be 40,000 years old. They took it to other scientists, the National Geographic. They actually wrote an article about it in 2012. And they took the tissue sample from this seed and they planted it. 40,000 years old. planted the seed, and it bloomed. Go online, research it on your own. A beautiful white flower. Sometimes we can think that what we're doing isn't really making a difference. There's too many things to change in the world, Father Nick. We can't do it all. There's too many problems in the world. I got my own problems. I can't make that change. Listen, just plant the seed. Try your best. God will do the rest. You just need to plant seeds of love, seeds of compassion, seeds of encouragement into this world. You're not called to be the same. You're called to be different. You are God's hands. You are God's feet. You are God's voice in this world. Don't be the same. You're different. And if you want to be different, listen up and change the world. You got to be willing to make a difference in the world. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen.